So now we're going to look through the English Language Paper 1, and we're going to look at how we approach the different questions and how we actually approach it in the exam. What's the best way to go about it? So on the screen, I have one of the past papers from the AQA website. This is from June 2018 from the morning session. So you'll be familiar with this type of paper, or you probably will be if you're in year 10 or year 11 and you're getting ready to take your exams. If you've never seen one of these papers before, don't worry. We're going to go through everything so that it makes complete sense. So if we just recap with what we've talked about for the front page, remember you've got some basics that you do need to do, which is use a black ink or ballpoint pen. So that's a biro or something with black ink. You need to answer the questions in the spaces provided. So remember, answers on the lines under the question where it's set out. You must answer all the questions. So they say this on the instructions because, as we've mentioned, if you don't answer the question, you can't get the marks. Do any rough work in the book. You can cross out anything you don't want to be marked. That's a very sensible piece of advice, because if you're working something out, you don't want them to mark it if it's not worth marking. You must refer to the insert booklet provided. That's the source text, so you definitely need to read that to be able to answer the questions. And don't use a dictionary. It's an English language exam, so it's pretty obvious that you don't need a dictionary. Shouldn't use a dictionary because they're testing your language skills, your English language skills. Okay, so we've gone over the marks. I'm not going to do that again. So the advice they have on the paper is just to spend 15 minutes reading the source, and all 5 questions you are to answer. So yes, I highly recommend reading through the paper before you start. So as you looked at, we said 50 minutes per section, 5 minutes reading. So what I want you to do, so we're changing around the 15 minutes suggestion, and that's okay, because what you're going to do is survey the text, survey the question paper first to figure out what you need. So we're going to do that today together. But first, let's have a quick skim through. So this is the first port of call. Skim through the English language paper and see what they're asking you. So section A, we know that the first question will be something simple. So it says, read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 4. List 4 things about Mr. Fisher from this part of the source. So here we can already see key information. And actually, I suggest that you do this when you're reading. And this is highlight things that are going to be useful. So as I mentioned, we need to survey and highlight key words. So let's look at question 1. Read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 4. So we know that this is important information. This is the location we're looking for. List 4 things about Mr. Fisher. So let's put that in another colour. 4 things about Mr. Fisher from lines 1 to 4. So when you're looking at your insert paper, which we'll do in a minute, you know exactly where to go to. So you can underline or highlight these in your exam. Okay, let's go to question 2. So we know we need to look at lines 9 to 5, and they've put them here as well. The question, so I'm not reading the text first because it's going to be in the text when I read it anyway. So, how does the writer use language here to convey Mr. Fisher's views on books and stories of the past? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, sentence forms. So let's look at the question. We know that we're going to be looking at lines 9 to 5. So when you go to your text and you have it open next to you, which we'll do in a minute, you are going to look at specifically 9 to 5. So let's look at the question and pick out the key things you're going to be looking for. How does the writer use language? So you're not going to be looking at themes, it's language. What words do they use? What types of phrases do they use? Okay, so how does the writer use language here to convey Mr. Fisher's views on books and stories of the past? So here, here is what the question is asking me to do. So when you go to the text, you know immediately when you're reading through in these lines specific, you could just highlight or circle or underline words and phrases that are to do with Mr. Fisher's ideas. So views, what is it? What does he think about books? And stories of the past. So not the present, but the past. Now, when it says you could, it means you should. When you've got an 8-mark question, you're going to be doing 2 to 3 paragraphs. And for the structure, I'd suggest doing 1 paragraph on words, 1 paragraph on language features, and 1 on sentence forms. You might decide that you want to put them together, but 2 to 3 paragraphs is what you're going to need with evidence. So we're going to come back and look at the text later. We're just looking at questions, just surveying what we need to know. So here they give you lots of space to look through. Okay, question 3. You now need to think about the whole of the source. So we know we're looking at the story as a whole now. This text is from the beginning of a story. So they're giving you some context here. We know that the source is the beginning. So if it's the beginning of the story, you need to have in your mind, well, what tells me it is the beginning? And then they ask you the question, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? So structure is one of the key words here, and interest. So you could write about these 3 bullet points, and it's an 8-mark question. So you need 2 to 3 paragraphs. Not too involved because it's only 8 marks. What the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes his focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. So here, the word structure is actually incredibly important. So you're going to be looking at beginning, middle, end. You can think about, what does it look like? How does the content change? So does the topic change throughout the text? What does the writer shift your focus to? This is specifically looking at structure. You're not going to be looking at themes. It's not going to be about how the writers love someone or the characters. It is really specific. It's very technical. So here, this exam is about, can you notice how writing is constructed? So here, the bullet points, what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source. Good. So use these bullet points. What I'd suggest you do is you do 1 paragraph on the first bullet point, 1 paragraph on the second bullet point. And if you have any other structural things that you want to talk about, if you've noticed in the text, we'll figure out what you can talk about when we read the text, then add that as a paragraph. And again, they give you lots of space, but you only want 2 to 3 paragraphs. So this is the maximum you should answer. Okay. 4. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from lines 25 to the end. So here you know where you're going to be looking. A student said this part of the story where Mr. Fisher is marking homework shows Tibbet's story is better than Mr. Fisher expected, and his reaction is extreme. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could, meaning you should, consider your own impressions of what Mr. Fisher expected Tibbet's homework to be like. Evaluate how the writer conveys Mr. Fisher's reaction to what he discovers. Support your response with references to the text. So immediately you notice this is a 20-mark question. It is going to be much more involved. You need at least 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion. At least. Now, when it comes to introductions, this is varied actually from teacher to teacher. Now, Some schools say that you don't do an introduction because you don't have the time. In this question, you are basically writing an essay, a considered response to a text. So I tell some students that it might be a good idea to write an introduction because it gets you into the flow of the actual essay, because you're introducing your topic and you're introducing your point of view. So if you are going to write an introduction, what's it accepted is a couple lines. So your introduction is 1 to 3 sentences maximum. It is literally just to introduce your essay topic and state what you're going to talk about and your opinion and what you'll argue in this. It's nothing more than that. Really nothing more. But if you think it will help you, write 1 to 2, maybe 3 at most in your introduction. But we'll talk more about structure when we go into this question specifically. But let's just look at how we survey this question and understand it in preparation for looking at the text. So, focus this part of your answer on the second part of the text. So here, we know second part of the text, lines 25 to the end. A student said this part of the story where Mr. Fisher is marking homework shows Tibbott's story is better than Mr. Fisher expects and his reaction is extreme. So what you're doing is you're evaluating this statement. To what extent do you agree? The examiner wants to hear your opinion. This is very, very important. You need to evaluate this statement and say how much, on a scale, how much do you agree with the statement? Is it true? Is it false? Is it valid? Why or why not? So the important thing here is you. Do you agree? How much? Then they've given you bullet points. So bullet points are help. It means you should answer them. It says you could, but it means you should. So consider your own impressions of what Mr. Fisher expected Tibbott's homework to be like. So what you're going to do here is you're going to look for what Mr. Fisher expected. So when you read the text, what did you think Mr. Fisher was going to think about Tibbott's homework? What did your first impression tell you? So actually, when we're reading the text, when you're reading, you need to note down any reactions you have to the text. And this is important. Now you know what you need to be reacting to. The second bullet point, evaluate how the writer conveys Mr. Fisher's reaction. So when it says evaluate how and conveys, we are going to be looking at structure, language, tone, all the technical aspects of actually writing. It's not themes. It's, did the writer do it effectively? How did it make you feel at the time? Did you identify with Mr. Fisher? Did you understand what he was thinking, why he was thinking it? Then, support your response with references to the text. You need to use quotes from the text. You specifically from line 25 to the end. That is really important. You can give your opinion, but if you don't give evidence, you are not going to be supporting your answer and proving why you are correct. You need to be able to support your answer. I cannot stress this enough. But likewise, if you give evidence but don't actually evaluate it, which this question is asking you to do, to give your opinion, to say why you think this, why are you using the evidence, the quote, you also won't get full marks. So you need both to be able to create a valuable and insightful answer, and that's what they're looking for. Now, we're going to have a quick look at question 5, which is going on to the creative writing section. So you have two options here. So either you're going to do a description or you're going to write a story. So the question is, a magazine has asked for contributions for their creative writing section. Either write a description of an old person as suggested by this picture, Or write a story about a time when things turned out unexpectedly. Now you have 24 marks for content and organisation, 16 marks for technical accuracy. So what does this mean? Content and organisation is, does the story make sense? Does the piece of writing make sense? Is it ordered in a way that the reader can understand it? And also, is it interesting? An examiner isn't expecting your work to be interesting, but it's a nice surprise when it is. Think about how Mr. Fisher will feel. We'll read about that in a minute. And then 16 marks for technical accuracy. So technical accuracy is your spelling, punctuation and grammar, your sentence structure. It's about using correct paragraph structure, all the technical things that you're commenting on in questions 1 to 4. Now you're expected to do it. So in this is why I suggest reading the paper first. Decide whether you're going to start with the story or your creative writing piece, or you're going to do the questions first. You don't actually have to do the paper in the order it's written in. You can do it mix and match. So if you have trouble with your story writing or creative writing, you might want to start with this, do a brainstorm, do a mind map, and think about what you're going to write first. Let it brew for while you do the other section and then come back to it. Or you may want to do it first and get it out the way. Either or, it doesn't matter which section you start with, just as long as you do all the sections and you answer all the questions. So if you think you're going to leave this to the last minute, you won't have any time, best to do some work on it. Don't get emotional about it. Don't think about how you're going to do it well or badly or anything. It's just about getting words down on the paper for this one. Ignore your feelings. That is the best way. You want to be as calm and rational as possible so that you can get the marks you need, or just have the chance to get the marks you need by getting something down on the paper. We'll talk about techniques and how you can prepare for this section when we look at question 5 specifically in one of the next videos. You can skip to it if you'd like to, or we're going to go from question 1 to 4 and look at how we answer those questions and use the text.